Okay. Well, that was a very pleasant surprise. So now we will, a lot of fun there. So now let's bring it back to science. So we are really excited for the next topic, as many of you are as well, I'm sure. Assessing cancer risk in wildland firefighters, unveiling the hidden hazards of the Fireline. Today joining us is Chief Joseph Eyck with Dr. Matt Rahn. Joseph Eyck is a retired division chief with CAL FIRE's Nevada Yuba Placer Unit. The individual has 40 years of fire service experience with CAL FIRE and Penn Valley Fire Protection District. He held multiple leadership roles, including Command Center Chief and Training and Safety Bureau Chief for the Tuolumne Calaveras Unit, and supervised the Placer County Hazmat Team. Additionally, he served as an Incident Commander, Type 1 Operations Chief, Fire Behavior Specialist, and is recognized subject matter expert to the Federal Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission, all while being a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Joining him on the stage is Dr. Matt Rahn, who is the Executive Director of the Wildfire Conservancy and Founding Director of the Wildfire Science Degree Program at California State University, San Marcos, with 2 decades of experience in wildfire research. His focus includes wildfire economics, firefighter health, and community resilience, collaborating with major organizations like CAL FIRE and U.S. Forest Services. Additionally, he has served as a council member and mayor of Temecula, California, and is involved in initiatives to improve firefighter mental health and study wildland cancer. Please join me in introducing Dr. Matt Rahn and Chief Eyck.
He's got the controller. All right. Hey, well, thank you for the introduction. So I'll skip the more boring parts of the bio. But my name is Dr. Matt Rahn. I've been working on wildland and urban interface issues for quite a long time, actually starting back with the Cedar Fire in 2003, which was kind of the canary in the coal mine for a lot of what's going on now in the nation. We also, talking about this wildland firefighting, I think the title is a little bit wrong given what we're seeing in the nation. It's no longer just wildland fires, it's wildland and urban interface. That's what we're dealing with today, and it's a rare thing when we just have vegetation burning and no other assets at risk. So I think, keeping that in mind, it's kind of how we came together, 15, 17 years ago now with CAL FIRE over a cup of coffee in Sacramento asking about some of the priorities that CAL FIRE had for their research, and it blossomed into really a career-long partnership and solid collaboration with groups that for me in my career has been an honor to work with. I'll let Joe introduce himself as well.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm pleased to come and humbled by the invitation. What we're going to talk about here, the importance of it can't be overstated. We're here because this is an opportunity to collaborate with each and every single one of you to lessen the risk. We do hazard assessment risk analysis all the time in the course of our jobs. And in 40 years in the fire service, starting out at the age of 14 as a volunteer with Penn Valley Fire Protection District, and then a break in service to serve in the United States Marine Corps, and then coming back and having 35 years with CAL FIRE. What we're talking about today is investment. And we're talking about investment in lessening risk. And so when we go through the slides today, keep that in mind about lessening risk. So I want to ask everybody to think about a few things before we get started. Number one, do you want to win? Does everybody here in the audience want to win? Think about what's on your mind right now. Do you want to win? What's victory look like? And then draw lines to it, because you're going to experience roadblocks, obstacles on the way to victory. You're never defeated until you quit. so don't quit. Be persistent in doing good and keep your good purposes in front of you. Remain steadfast. We don't use those words enough in our culture today. So I'll move forward into the slides, and then once Dr. Rahn and I are finished, we'll be pleased to take any questions that you have. So I'll get past the introduction. I was blessed with a 35-year career in the department. I've served in multiple capacities on command and general staff positions, and then all the way down to the engine company level. Incident management teams that are interagency with federal agency as well as state agency as well. So when we speak to you about these things, and the pictures that we're leaving here are intentional, because I want you to think about the fact that the firefighters here that you're going to be seeing in these pictures in between the slides are going to be out there working 24, 36, 48-hour shifts in that environment where it's smoke and dust. And so what can we do to lessen risk? And that's what we're talking about here today. So Dr. Rahn was very well spoken, and he called it the Wildfire Urban Interface, because that's what we're dealing with in almost all these. 88% of the fire agencies in the United States are under the threat of having a catastrophic wildfire urban interface fire in their communities. And we're here to safeguard communities. And we're here together to collaborate on how to safeguard the safeguarders. Dr. Rahn.
I think the important message here too is that these firefighters that we'll talk about today are more common in your communities than not. It used to be a West Coast phenomenon that everybody's familiar with. California's on fire again. It's no longer the case. It's become a national phenomenon and really an international one. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about climate change in Florida or not. We do in California, so I'll just call it community resilience here. But that's a big part of this, right? And it's undeniable that things have changed. Like, let's just accept that things have changed over time. But as that has occurred, we have communities at risk now. I used to use the number 5.1 million. 5.1 million homes are at risk in the state of California, located in this urban interface, a higher number than any other state in the nation. That number is being revised because we are revising our footprint of what we now consider under these new scenarios, high-risk communities, and it's well above 12 million homes in high-risk areas today. So you think about the impact that has and then translate that to the rest of the country. This is a serious consideration. The reason we're talking about the risk of our firefighters is that most fire departments at some point are going to be responding to these types of incidents without respiratory protection and without PPE or gear that does anything substantial to reduce their dermal exposures as well. That's the importance of this conversation today.
As you can see on the slides, we need to do more research on PPE that addresses the wildfire urban interface fire environment. Most of the research has been done on municipal structural fire operations when we go out there. One of the reasons that we're here too is the federal agencies did studies that announced findings that attributed trends that make it a fire year versus a fire season now, to where we're starting to look at, for example, in California, the need to have a year-round workforce so that when we have these disaster incidents such as the Palisades and the Eaton incident in Southern California, that we have a bigger bullpen to be able to respond to them. It's about new strategies, a different way of thinking. It's about investing in respiratory protection as well as the personal protective equipment that protects not just against thermal exposure, but also protects respiratory hazards and against the carcinogen exposures, which is why everybody's here.
And I think the other important message with regard to community resilience, and our team was on the fires in Los Angeles for the last month or so, and we need to start acknowledging that those are 9/11 scale exposure incidents for the first responders at those fires. We need to stop calling them wildfires. The media, the press, our elected officials and decision makers need to start thinking about these as 9/11 scale exposure incidents, because they truly are. The difference today, though, is we have a lot of new materials and things in the environment that we haven't had historically. The lithium batteries that were scattered throughout, whether they're in vehicles or battery storage or other products throughout the property, mixed with a lot of older homes that have things like asbestos. You put all of these into, one massive combustion event, and we're talking about, one of the most unhealthy environments imaginable for a human being to be able to work in. That's an important consideration that we need to do better for, because those folks were out there for days and weeks at a time, and that exposure continues long into mop-up as well. We just simply aren't doing enough to protect our folks from those kind of exposures, let alone translate what we do know back to the community to provide them with additional protection as well.
So as a result of that, what we need for everybody here to invest in today is the top bullet, is recognition, number one, which will then translate into safety. Because what they're breathing out there in this environment is hydrocarbon smoke, not just natural vegetation. When they're mopping up, for example, you go out there in Southern California, a lot of those homes, they're full of asbestos. But also in the wildfire environment, we have asbestos fields that a lot of folks didn't recognize. So respiratory protection, to protect them from exposure, is essential. When we talked about, the gentleman before is about signing up, and only 20,000 people signed up for the directory. The captain is king of the fire station. I was a fire captain for 14 years before I promoted to battalion chief. You drive the ship. The chiefs will give expectations. You're the one that enforces it. If you don't make it important, it's not going to be important to the firefighters, to the engineers, to the lieutenants. So registry, wearing PPE, taking care of PPE is absolutely essential to success in battle.
Well, and obviously Joe is our motivational speaker, and I'm kind of like the boring scientist guy, right? Because, when we start talking about, fire captains and all of that, we actually did the research. So every one of our projects today that we do includes a behavioral and cultural component to it. One of the reasons we did that is we started to see, we had a lot of great projects that came out of the program over the years, but we would see these not be implemented, or we would go on to incident and ask the firefighters, hey, why aren't you doing this new practice or whatever? And things, are getting done. We're proud of ourselves, patting ourselves on the back, but these research reports, these policies and guidelines are sitting on a shelf collecting dust. And part of that we find out really from an analysis, doing the surveys, doing interviews with firefighters, talking to them about this. Why is that the case? And the number one reason, time and again, has always been leadership. If it's not institutionalized, if it's not there, that somebody, whether it's your captain or your BC or whomever it is, saying, no, you shall do this, not just that it's a good idea, but this is what we want to see you doing out on the fire line, that'd be a great example of how to move things forward. But it has to come from leadership, and they have to buy into that. And I think we've all heard the phrase, the fire service is 100 years of tradition unencumbered by progress, right? We can't let that be the case anymore. We have to do better. And I'll tell you, firefighters are desperate for solutions. They are looking for solutions after these major exposure events, or when they feel sick, or when they, are worried about their own health and safety. They are going out and finding their own solutions, and that's a dangerous practice. We need science-based, medical-based solutions for these firefighters to help them live long and healthy lives.
For the leadership in the room, we manage things, we lead people. Remember that. If we don't remember much out of that, we manage things, we lead people. Adequate staffing. While we're doing research, and when somebody gets ill, we react and we treat. There's things we can do in front of that on the preventative level. When we invest in staffing, having adequate staffing, we're investing in shortening the duration of these incidents, shortening the duration, the length of exposure to these toxic chemicals from hydrocarbon products. We're all sitting on them, the carpet's full of them, the flooring, the walls, everything here when it comes up, whether it's phosgene, hydrogen cyanide, the different byproducts of combustion that come up. So strategic thinking, because what I'm talking about is in the second bullet is all risk, all hazard responders. Because the wildfire urban interface, we're doing structure defense, we're rescuing people, temporary refuge areas if we have to, till we can get them out of there safely, as well as perimeter control. So strategic thinking should aim to ensure that we invest in staffing so that they have the support and that we lessen risk by lessening the duration of incidents.
And going back to the staffing issue, we did research on staffing. So back when the IFF was doing their project and NIST and everybody looking at firefighter staffing for urban and high-rise firefighting, we did the same but for wildland firefighting. And we compared a 2-person, 3-person, 4-person, and even up to a 5-person engine and looked at attack effectiveness. Now, the gold standard for the municipals is 4 persons on an engine. It's the same for wildland, it turns out. If you take a 3-person engine and just add 1 body to that engine, it collectively lowers everybody's heart rate, lowers everybody's respiratory rate, and increases our metrics for attack effectiveness. Was how far we could go into the fires, do extended hose lays and so forth and hit these different metrics. It increased attack effectiveness by 50% just adding that 1 additional body. Core temperatures for these firefighters often exceeded 103, 104 degrees. We had peak heart rates, sustained peak heart rates well above 220 beats a minute, if you can believe that. And I'm sure most of the firefighters in the room aren't surprised to hear that. We had one fellow who was 104.2 degrees core temperature, maintaining a heart rate of 238 beats a minute. This was not on initial attack. This was not at the worst and heaviest part of a fire. And we've never been able to really collect that data because it's a little bit complicated logistically to do. But lowering all of that risk and exposure potential by just adding extra staffing is a huge step forward in the right direction.
The other part of the investment in staffing has to be training, which is essential. I've been a fire service instructor for over a quarter of a century. I oversaw a training bureau. I know that the main things are the plain things, and the plain things are the main things. And all of us, as we're trying to figure out what we're uncertain of in this room, are hanging on to what we are certain of. And training is foundational to success in what we're trying to do. The issue that we run into in the wildfire urban interface fire environment, as the statistics show, is while 88% of our fire agencies are exposed, and this is 88% in the United States and Canada, are exposed to having to respond to these type of incidents, only 40% of them have training, and some of those 40%, it's inadequate training. There's nothing worse in the world than knowing you're going to something and you're not sure what to do. So it's up to us, the leadership in this room and fire service, as well as the researchers and other guests here, to support and invest in training that will make our people safe and competent. And then the next one, the International Association of Firefighters. We represent 353,000 firefighters, uniformed professional firefighters in the United States and Canada. And we collaborate with the European Union, and we collaborate with people over in Asia and Australia as well too. So what we saw was to bridge this gap. We took the CAL FIRE WUI Principles book, which is the Bible for wildfire urban interface firefighting. And with the permission of the chief, we adopted it and created a program called Responding to the Interface. That way our folks, when they go out there, can respond safe and competent. We've trained people here in Florida. We've done train-to-trainers so they can go back and train their firefighters in their agency. And if we do that, then we spread this to where everybody can be safe and competent out there in operations.
And a lot of this came from a symposium that was held in 2014 in Sacramento. It was led by CAL FIRE and CAL FIRE Local 2881, along with what would ultimately become our organization, Wildfire Conservancy. But a lot of conversation was focused on the 1973 report during the Nixon administration, America Burning. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that, embedded in that document was the idea that if you really want to propel this issue forward, at least from an urban and structure fire perspective, education and research were really important and critical components of that. And so we took that message to heart, but collectively around the room, our national and state experts all agreed that wildland, and especially urban interface firefighting, was easily a generation behind everybody else. And so this is why we created the Wildfire Conservancy. This is why the IFF developed its training programs for other departments nationally. This is why a lot of these things happened, because we knew research and education really are the things that help propel things forward. With regard to PPE, we've been doing a lot of work as of late. The NFPA serves as this standard, right? We all know this, but as the issues come about where there's a disconnect between what's being done on the ground and what's being implemented as a standard, this is kind of a big deal. NFPA 1984 comes out a few years ago, more than 10 years ago now, recommending respiratory protection for wildland firefighters. Today we still do not have a single device that's been certified or available for our wildland firefighters. If you want to go to the next one, just look at the difference, right? Sadly, I always talk about Ed Pulaski. Is anybody familiar with Ed Pulaski? Forest Service guy, early 1910s. The tool, the Pulaski, is named after him. He kind of invented that. And I always say, if you took somebody from the military in 1910 and dropped them on the modern battlefield, it would be nearly unrecognizable to them. The technology, the gear, the armaments, everything has changed so dramatically. But if you took Ed Pulaski from 1910 and dropped him on a wildland fire today, it would be immediately recognizable. The only difference is he's not wearing jeans and a t-shirt anymore, right? But a lot of the same tools and things, the Pulaski is still a good tool. Fundamentally, we still need to change what we're exposing our wildland firefighters to. When they're out there just breathing in this stuff, this is bad. And I'm tired of hearing when we talk about this that, oh, it's just wood smoke, or oh, it's just vegetation smoke. There is no good version of smoke. It's all bad. It's all causing cancer. It's just there's worse versions of this than others.
Yeah, this picture right here gives a good example of that. And what Dr. Rahn is talking about is the wildlands today are full of old and new dump sites. We have the incident within the incident. We have the communities that store hazardous materials, that when we have these urban interface incidents that turn into conflagrations and are running through it, that they're exposed to. But all of them are carcinogenic. None of them are healthy. The brush out in California, for example, there's two models in particular I'll talk to you about. There's one called Chemise and another called Manzanita. Both, when they burn, they have a high oil content in them. So think about that. You're not just burning natural wood smoke or natural grass. You're inhaling something for that long. And so the firefighters, the respiratory protection part of this, which Dr. Rahn will expand upon shortly because this is a passion of his, is key, because we're using the same stuff that I used when I started my career over 40 years ago. And we got to do better than that. We've invested in the municipal side of this and air purifier APRs for known substances, as well as SCBAs. But we have to develop a product that the firefighter, when they go around the corner from their supervisor, isn't going to rip off their face, because they're going to be working 12, 24, 36, 48 hours. I'm living proof you can stay up for 96 hours. I don't recommend that. But the investment in this part of it, in PPE, and this is part of that, is absolutely essential. Dr. Rahn.
So I'll talk about the Los Angeles fires here for a second. When we talk about respiratory protection, there was none. On day 3, I think it was, of the incident, we're getting phone calls about some of the protective gear and questions about what we could do to make things better, because nobody's wearing anything. At the IC for the Palisades fire, we find out and we're reassured and told that there are roughly 3,000 N95 masks available at supply. And I said, well, aren't there about 6,000 firefighters on the incident right now? Where's the disconnect? Why isn't somebody taking a box of those N95 masks and throwing them in the vehicle of every engine that's rolling out in the morning, going out to that incident saying, put this on? We know it's not perfect, but that's part of the problem. All of these organizations are working toward perfection when it comes to respiratory devices. I'll acknowledge our absolutely astonishing partner in Dr. Brian Ormond and NC State sitting back there working on his computer, because I'm pretty sure he's putting his talk together right now. Call you out like that, I'm sorry. They've been remarkable partners of ours because they help, do the science. And he said at our symposium last year, one of, I think, the most critical bits of information, he said, stop worrying about the perfection. And he also said, when you talk about the N95 standard, you look at it from 95% blocking of particles and stuff, and anything less than that, we're failing our firefighters. And he said, no, we're not failing our firefighters. Right now, we have 0. So even if we get them up to 40% protection, that's way better than we're doing right now. So this pursuit of perfection and creating standards and devices and having everything approved and tested and everything else, there are just common sense solutions that we could have implemented on that incident to protect our firefighters that we absolutely failed to do. And it's no failure of the agencies. They don't have the guidance. They don't have the support from the scientific community that they need to move this thing forward. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation today.
Dr. Rahn makes a good point, and we are getting some collaboration now. There were some other universities that were mentioned. Boise State is also one of the recent ones that are working on respiratory protection. I like to try to operate on the 80-20 principle in a couple of different areas. I like to operate on it in leadership and supervision. I try to keep 80% of the people I'm responsible for working within the areas they're gifted in, and then 20% outside their comfort zone. If I flip that around, they fail, I fail, the organization fails as well too. Same thing if we're in negotiations on adopting a standard, because NFPA, International Code Council, those things all take years to happen. And we can move faster than that and get a product out there. So if we're in agreement on 80% of something, how about if we just ink that, celebrate that, reevaluate to 20%, and be committed to work on the 20%. So in other words, if we can increase the 11% protection in respiratory protection that currently exists when you wear a bandana and a Nomex shroud to 25 or 30 or 40%, we should do it. If we have that there, we should do that. And then we work on the rest of that to try to get to perfection. But let's not wait, let's not get bogged down. So as we move forward and we look at investment, as we look at what victory is and drawing lines to victory, it's essential that we do that.
I think we've covered most of this. The other piece is the dermal, right? So we have respiratory exposures, we have dermal exposures. Dermal exposures are a massive issue on these incidents because, we tested all the gear again in collaboration with RTI and NC State, looking at the CAL FIRE gear, kind of the standard of what's out there along with Forest Service and others. And we realized that, yeah, it's okay at stopping stuff from getting on the skin, but ultimately, after a 12, 24-hour shift, it's all there. In fact, the original research we did when, you saw the wipe samples probably that folks had done on the bunker gear and structure firefighting, we did the same exact protocols, and we weren't seeing anything on the wildland gear for the firefighters. No PAH, no VOCs, not a lot of anything going on. And it's because we're not catching them right after the incident. We're catching them after 12, 24 hours on the incident. All that stuff is now embedded in the fabrics. It's in their skin. It's not just sitting on the surface anymore. That's why we weren't seeing it. And so moving on to better protection standards, we are testing some of the fabrics that are out there, newer design, that have particulate barriers built in. And at least in the laboratory and in some of the early field trials, we're seeing a reduction in dermal exposures, at least by particulates, down close to 95%. It's a huge step forward. But with every decision we make, we uncover a new problem, right? And the new problem is that gear is way more contaminated than the rest of the gear. It off-gasses at a much higher rate than normal gear because it's not penetrating the body, it's not getting into the firefighters, and now we're putting all these firefighters back in the engines And what we realized is as we're working on our clean cab protocols and projects, that the inside air quality of a wildland engine, even when you're in the smoke and the inversion, is oftentimes 60% of the time worse than standing outside. That's because you dropped all those firefighters in that engine, you sealed it up, and you've got all that off-gassing and everything else that's occurring at that time. We have to simply do better. And every time we come up with a new solution, we uncover a brand new problem, and we have to be prospective about that.
It's interesting that Dr. Rahn says that because these firefighters will be assigned to an incident for 7, 14, 21, 28 days. The longest I ever was out was, I think it's either 53 or 58. I'm a middle-aged male. I can't remember why I walk into a room sometimes, so forgive the not being certain. But to talk about the off-gassing, I've been married 38 years, still on my honeymoon, married up. And when I would come home from an incident, my wife will tell you, I'd showered up multiple times. I go to bed for about the next 3 to 4 days. I'm off-gassing smoke as I exhale. Everything that I'm taking in, it's more challenging that 1 hour, wipe everything off, because this is our combat, and it's fluid, and we're not able to disengage. We're rescuing people. We're doing structure defense. We're doing perimeter control. We don't have the opportunities to disengage on something like this. When your loved one's at risk, we're going to go in and get them. And so it makes it more challenging for that 1 hour to carve out time to clean up everything. All those are essential practices. It's just a different environment. It's a different way of thinking. So investing in the research that Dr. Rahn and others in the room here are doing to lessen risk by lessening the exposure or getting rid of it, clean cab, PPE, decontamination practicals are absolutely essential.
And I think that's sort of the take-home message, right? Is that we know common sense-wise what needs to be done. I'll end with one, because I think we're over time here. She's nodding. But I'll end with one quick story again with the Los Angeles fires. We know that cleaning the skin periodically, especially on these long shifts, is going to help reduce your overall exposures and cancer risk. We know this. This is just a common sense thing. There's been some research on this, which wipes are best and which products and so forth. Well, that's something we can all figure out later. But in the interim, we weren't allowing our firefighters, we weren't giving them any of the tools to be able to do this. And it was actually a firefighter from Kern County who we were talking about, and we said, I'd love to get those dermal wipes, and how do we get those large body wipes and all that out to these firefighters, and the logistics and blah, blah, blah. And this kid, 19, 20 years old, looks at me and he says, just put it in our lunch sack. Like, we're all going out, and here we're all a bunch of scientists trying to figure out this complicated logistics issue with the department and everything else. They just put it in our lunch sack. Turns out it wasn't that easy. They're like, oh, the contract says this, and blah, blah, and bureaucracy got in the way. We could have done the right thing for our firefighters and immediately had some kind of preventative measure out there for them. But you know how it is. You know how difficult it is to get change to occur. This was just a common sense measure that could have helped. And that's really where we need to go is, the science is important. The cancer research is important. The work that's being done allows decision makers and legislators to pass the kinds of laws and regulations that we need to have to help our firefighters. But some of this is just such common sense. We should be implementing this today, and sadly, I don't think we are.
I'll leave you with this last slide. I want to explain it a little bit before we're open to discussion if there's any time. Those are incident qualifications cards, and both Frank and myself put them at the location of the Granite Mountain Hotshot burnover, where there's 19 people that lost their lives on that incident right there. Safe, competent response. We don't want to be right. What we want to do is we want to get it right. So invest in the staffing, invest in the training, invest in the research, translates into health and safety, translates to success in battlefield. So thank you very much, and we're here for questions if there's time.
Okay, so any questions that we want to entertain here from the room or from online? And if you wouldn't mind standing, because the light is so glaring, we honestly can't see you from up here. It's pretty dark. Oh, right here.
I have a question here. Has any studies been done that looks at the smoke coupled with the chemicals, retardants, coupled with the residential fires, and how is that affecting firefighters? We know about the wildland, and we know individually, but when you add them together, how is that affecting the health and wellness of the firefighter and exposure through the PPE and what they're breathing? Because if they have no PPE and they have no SCBAs,
Thank you.
we know they're breathing it in. Because those are fine chemicals if anybody's ever worked with a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of, when you put it all together, I was going, holy cow, plus, 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 plus.
Yeah, turn it.
Yeah. Yes and no. Okay, so one of the things I'll say is kind of disappointing is, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, especially the medical folks in the room. After the Los Angeles fires, we're getting calls, from a lot of folks, what do I do, right? What kind of screening should I be having, all that. We've been working with the IFSCS and others to do a lot of blood draws. We're going to have close to 500 blood draws on firefighters post-exposure. It's one of the largest data sets I'm aware of. We also put out silicone wristbands on our firefighters to sort of passively collect. This is Duke University, has done a lot of that work, passively collect those exposures and compare them to post-exposure urine samples as well to say, what's in the environment, smoke and soot and ash and all of that versus what's, the body showing. So we're starting to get towards some of that, type of work. The sad thing, though, is, again, after the LA fires, and even post 9/11, what surprised me, and I knew this, but I didn't really know it, and I'm getting calls from even, LAPD and others, we've done work with them in the past, asking, our folks have been heavily, heavily exposed. We should be sending them to the doctor to get screenings and things done. What should they do? And the answer is, we don't have a protocol for that. 25 years, roughly, 20-something years later, post 9/11, you're telling me we don't have a standard protocol to send these first responders to say, collect this blood, collect a urine sample, collect a hair sample, do some skin swabs, whatever it is, respiratory analysis, all of that. We have nothing that we're sending these folks to do. So Orange County went ahead and they sent all of their folks to a clinic that they have a contract with to do blood samples to look at metals. Other people, again, firefighters are going to find their own solutions absent the scientific and medical community giving them guidance. And that's sad. We can do better than that, but we're simply not there. So these are the gaps that need to be fixed.
One of the steps that we're doing is that Matt was successfully embedded with the CAL FIRE incident management teams with the approval of the incident commander and the agency administrator. We're looking at the preseason meetings, which will be coming up sooner than later, for both the state level, local level, national level incident management teams, to where we have people like Matt in the room that are there in our medical units that can then do this kind of work and capture personnel, the percentage of them coming off the line to be able to do this. But he is right about the standards. I oversaw and typed out a hazmat team, and our physicals there are way more comprehensive and baseline setting than this. In the meantime, the encouragement is make sure you always have your personal physicals every year for your baseline, as well as your agency mandated ones as well.
So I know we're just a little bit over time, but both gentlemen will be here in the audience and during lunch, so please engage them. And I'm so incredibly thankful. This was very excellent presentation. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, thank you.